Look, good afternoon or good morning for a couple of our panel members, and thanks for joining us to what is the inaugural IWA webinar series. My name's Michael Story. I'm a member of the IWA Committee of the Australian Water Association. I'd like to begin this afternoon's proceedings by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and waterways on which we work and play. I'm in Sydney, which is Gadigal country. And the Gadigal people were one of many tribes of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the Eora Nation elders past, present and emerging. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat box there. I'd just encourage and in fact invite you just to use that chat box, just to spend a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which you currently reside. We've got a great audience, and it'd be great to see some of the lands on which you currently, from Darug country. Alex Check, thank you. Darug's out in the Parramatta and Western Plains of Sydney. And if there's any others, please use that chat box and share that with you. The other motivation is that we'll be using the chat box over the course of today's presentation to put any questions to our panel. So I do invite you to put any questions in that. We've got Cora country in Adelaide from Nicola McGonigal. Thanks, Nicola. Look, it's great to have you on board. Please pose any questions in the chat box at the bottom. It'd be great to put those in front of the panel. Without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Tom Mollenkopf to give the welcome address to this afternoon's webinar. Tom is President-elect of the International Water Association, having been a Senior Vice President and Board Member of IWA for 6 years. Tom is CEO of the Peter Cullen Water and Environment Trust. He's a Senior Associate with the Aether Consultancy and a member of the Australian Water Partnership Expert Review Panel. Between 2007 and 2013, Tom was CEO of the Australian Water Association, having previously been Deputy Executive Director of the International Water Association in London. Tom's background is in law, first in private legal practice, then as corporate counsel, before undertaking a series of executive management roles at Southeast Water in Melbourne. We're privileged to have Tom here today, so please join me in welcoming Tom Mollenkopf.
Thanks very much for that, Michael, and thank you. Can I just say thanks to you right at the outset for all your work in putting today's webinar together. What energises me is the opportunity and responsibility of offering leadership, sharing a vision, and inspiring others, and that's what is at the core of IWA's reason for being. My 2-year term as president of IWA will start in May next year, after a little bit of a hiccup this year and the delay of our Copenhagen conference. But I'm incredibly excited about the opportunities on the horizon. We know that there continue to be challenges in how we might go about our mission, given the ongoing limitations on face-to-face meetings and international travel. But there should be no doubt about the need and the value of IWA. For IWA, our why is incredibly compelling. I think speaking to an audience of water professionals, it sometimes seems trite to observe that the world's water challenges are immense. But it's worth saying it. They're immense and they're existential. Over 2 billion people without access to safe drinking water and 4.5 billion without access to sanitation. Water security at threat due to over-abstraction, increasing urbanisation, growth in demand, pollution and territorial tensions, all compounded by the impacts of climate change. It's hard to think of a stronger rallying cry. How we approach our task is where our values, the IWA DNA, shine through. As more and more people see an increasingly daunting, dry future of scarcity and stress, the IWA has to become more relevant as the place where innovative solutions are found. We encourage open dialogue and collaboration. We share the best evidence and outcomes from around the world. We connect a broad community of water professionals and organisations. We draw on all elements of the water sector. It's truly an honour and a privilege to be elected as IWA President. One of the great benefits of the role is that I get to meet and work with some of the brightest and best minds in water, and no more so than today. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce three outstanding speakers from the global IWA community, plus our very own Daryl Day, who'll wrap things up a little later on. To the topic of today. While governments and organisations worldwide have made a commitment to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, recent research has shown that much more focus needs to be applied on the impact on livelihoods, biodiversity and sustainability. Without increased action, there will be significant social, economic and environmental disruption in our region and globally. Sometimes our frustration at the pace of political action is palpable, wants to drive us to the streets to agitate for change. But it's important that we also pursue constructive and informed debate. And I hope that with the result that science will inform good policy and action. So let's begin. I did say we have three outstanding speakers, and our first speaker this afternoon, Australian time, is Dr. David Malden, who's the former Director General of the International Centre for Integrated Mountain Development in Kathmandu in Nepal. David recently completed his term there as Director General, and ICMOD is an organisation dedicated to mountains and people of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region spread across Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, Nepal and Pakistan. ICMOD works in fields relating to sustainable mountain development, including climate change and water resource management. David's got a pretty stellar background, having previously been Deputy Director General at the Integrated Water Management Institute, contributed to publications of over 250 pieces and received many awards. And I'm thrilled that he's been able to join us. So David, looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Am I getting my slides on? Okay, do you see the first slide, Tom? Okay, great. Okay, and greetings to everyone, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. What I would like to do is take you to the mountains to discuss climate change and also some solutions. The place where ICMOD works, we call it the Hindu Kush Himalaya, and Tom mentioned the countries that it covers, but it's an important ecosystem, as we'll see in the region, with 10 major river basins starting in the mountains. Now, one thing, there are about 240 million people. That's not a small number of people living in the mountains, but about 1.65 billion people who rely on water that has its source in mountains. So think of Yellow, Yangtze, Ganges, Indus, et cetera, Mekong. Those are pretty significant river systems in Asia. But what else we recognize, yes, water is there, but this is a global asset because it also has huge diversity. One is the diversity in people, and people have recorded over 1,000 different living languages in that particular region. And that's important, especially when we're thinking of climate change, because people have found solutions to work in all different kinds of environments. So there are a lot of solutions within people's knowledge, the traditional knowledge in that region. It's incredibly important for biodiversity. 4 of 36 global hotspots are found in the region. It's interesting, on the one hand, it's a big problem everywhere, is habitat is being lost, species are being lost. But on the other hand, people are still discovering new species in the Eastern Himalaya. About 35 new species each year are being discovered. What I think is, what it's telling us is that only now is modern science kind of catching up to that traditional knowledge. And there is a lot to discover, a lot to learn in the region. Food diversity is incredibly important. There's the genetic diversity is something that could and will help us in the long term with food security in the region. So there's an incredible diversity of crops and animals, as well as the way people eat. But this graphic shows the red is the population density just downstream of the mountains, just downstream of the Hindu Kush Himalaya. So we see the Indo-Gangetic Plains, huge population densities. The Yellow and Yangtze River Basin, also huge population densities. The other part we recognize is that's where the votes are, is often in these red areas. So we find out that policies about mountains are often made away from mountains, right? In Delhi or Beijing, or for that matter, even Washington, DC, what kind of policies are made have tremendous impact on mountain areas. This is especially true with climate change as well. So we think that what happens in the mountains affects 1/4 of humanity. Actually, I feel it very much affects all of humanity, is that it's also a conflict-prone region, a lot of tension over natural resource management too in the area, and important biodiversity and ecosystems. Actually, Isimod calls this the pulse of the planet, right? So if humanity is doing fine, we'll find a good pulse in the mountains. I think right now, humanity, the pulse is rather weak, maybe looking up slightly after the last few days. Let's see. Isimod was mentioned. I just finished there a month ago, but it's owned by the 8 countries who share the mountain resources, dedicated to mountains and people in the region, with a mission to, yes, enable resilient and sustainable mountain development, but also to do that through knowledge, through good evidence and science, and cooperation across borders, which is quite special in that particular region. And so there's a special role of linking good science with policy, right? Kind of a bridging organization to do that. And there's another special role for this type of organization, and that is a regional organization working across boundaries. So Isimod does a lot of work in transboundary river basins, for example. And one good way we find to do that is to have platforms of people kind of working on science, sharing ideas, and getting those messages to policymakers. So we've worked a lot with, in fact, with Australia on the Koshi River Basin, and have a Koshi disaster risk reduction knowledge hub, and the Upper Indus Basin across China, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, sharing knowledge with professionals there and getting that to policymakers. A very special role of science and diplomacy in that region. I want to tell you about another regional work. The Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment was released last year and brought together about 300 different scientists and brought together important policy, evidence-based policy messages that could be delivered to scientists and policymakers in the region. What I want to do is show a few of those, highlight a few of the findings from that assessment. The first finding is about sustainable development itself. And we tallied up from the countries of the people who live in mountains, 30% of people suffer from food insecurity, about 50% are malnourished. Child stunting is huge. In spite of having incredible hydroelectric potential, still about 80% of people rely on non-clean energy for cooking. Poverty is higher in mountains than countrywide averages, about 1/3 of people in mountains than in the 8 countries in that region. And it's no wonder there's a high degree of out-migration in the region. There is a push factor to this. I will say it's interesting with COVID, people have started to resettle back in the mountains, which is offering some interesting issues in mountain areas. So if we go to temperature change, so in the Paris Agreement, people had their eyes set on a 1.5 degree world, if possible. But even that is already too hot for mountains. So what we see is what we call temperature amplification in mountain areas. It gets hotter faster at elevation. So at a 1.5 world would give us 2.1 degrees in mountains. If we were to reach a 2 degree world, that would be about 2.5 degrees in mountains. But if we stay on our current emission trend, right, don't really move us off the curve of emissions we're on, we can see upwards of 5 degrees in mountain areas. And for me, that's just unthinkable, the consequences of that. If the report got a lot of attention because of the statements it was making about glaciers. And in that 1.5 degree world, we found that about 1/3 or glaciers would lose about 1/3 of their volume. What that means is glaciers will lose 1/3 of their volume already, no matter what we do. Under current emission trends, about 2/3 of the volume will be lost. And this also has impact on snow cover. A lot of rain coming at higher elevation, earlier release of snow melt in the area, which you can imagine has tremendous implications on the hydrology in that region. One issue we do face in the region is air pollution and black carbon. So not only is that unhealthy, has negative impacts on crop, but it also lays down this black soot, which causes snow and glaciers to melt even faster. It's a climate forcer in the region. It's also something that in the region, something can be done and quickly to address climate change impacts as well. So if we think about the climate change impacts on water resources, looking at this diagram, the blue area are the glaciers in the region. So what we see is that the people, we talk a lot about building reservoirs and dams, but we're already losing our natural storage in snow and ice. The biggest hit will be on the people closest to the snow and ice, but in a way, the glaciers tell part of the story in that the precipitation patterns, in addition, will change in this region, changing monsoon patterns. So what we see is more floods and more droughts in the region. Now, one of the Indus River Basin, right, as we'll see, is what the most vulnerable to that change in snow and ice in the region, and heavily dependent on that water, especially for food production as well as cities. This is a photo from Ladakh in Nang. You can see up high, you can see the white kind of postage stamp sized glaciers. I don't think they have very long, maybe that's 20 years at maximum. This community receives all their irrigation water from snow and glacier melt. So one has to wonder what is going to happen with this beautiful mountain community in the future. If we look kind of at the whole river basin, and remember downstream, it's like one of the biggest irrigated areas. I think it is the Asia region with those rivers has more irrigated area than anywhere. The Indus River is heavily dependent on that snow and glacier melt. If you look on to the Ganges River, it's more dependent on rainfall. But there in the Ganga, we also have that changing precipitation patterns in that region. And so we have what else is happening on top of this is the risk of disasters of all sorts is increasing, right? So that's floods, droughts, also landslides, avalanches in the region that are somehow climate related. You can see the bar graphs at the bottom, and that's kind of every 10 years, the impact of the disaster, which seems to be doubling about every 10 years. So people are, in a sense, already feeling that impact of climate change, and something the region definitely has to be prepared for. And remember, a lot of those river basins are transboundary as well. Then on top of that is COVID-19, very much a crisis of livelihood impacts, as we know, on income and employment. I'm very frightened about food security in the region, hitting hardest the migrants, poor and marginalized. And I think one important message from this, yes, we need investments to recover from COVID, but can those investments be the same that will deliver us long-term sustainability and also help us deal with climate change as well? So the question is, clearly the HKH region is one that will face huge impacts from climate change, on top of the issues related to SDGs. So the issue is, how do you build resilience? And one way to think about resilience, yes, it's recovery from shocks like floods, it's adapting to the future, but I like to also think it's an opportunity for transformative change, kind of jumping forward to something better. And that's what I think we have to look out for in this opportunity of change. And I'll give just a few examples of the work ISIMOD has done on resilience. One is on community-based flood early warning systems. And the gadget on the left is somehow measures the water level. And then when it gets high, it sends a signal to a woman in her house. And she has all kinds of phone numbers. So she calls downstream. She even calls the police to tell them to come and rescue people. And very highly appreciated community-based flood early warning system. This was adapted and replicated in Pakistan as well. And you can see the sensor down on that rock. So when the water hits the sensor, what happens is a siren goes off. And basically people have to find a safe place. But it's, these things happen so quick and so fast that early warning is incredibly important. What we find, by the way, is not the technology that's important, but it really is working with the people, working with the women in those communities to own, operate, and really take care of the equipment. And what was inspiring was that this technology was adapted and taken up right across the region, and actually helped in some transboundary floods where one community in Nepal was calling downstream to a community in India. So just a few other types of solutions. And what we find a lot of time, the science is at this grand kind of global level, but the solutions are oftentimes very much at village level. I think renewable energy will be huge, and somehow in the mountains to jump to renewables quickly will be a key. And we can see there are huge payoffs to renewable, to nature, right? Huge yields to that, as well as making economic sense as well. And we've tried this out, for example, if glaciers are melting, to have an alternate water source for people. In the mountain areas, the springs are a primary water source for most people. They don't get as much attention as glaciers from outsiders, but indeed they're quite important for people in the mountains. And what we've seen is these have dried up. It's not just climate change, all kinds of different factors, but something we have to pay attention to. And so a big work in the future then is reviving. And so a lot of work has been done with partners on how to revive those spring sources. So what we find, again, every time is that when we're working with communities, it is community science. There's a lot of out-migration. Women are very firmly in control of their resources, have getting more and more agency and voice in the region. So it is incredibly most important to work with those women. That's me looking at the gadget, of course, the hydraulic ram pump. So we do have that knowledge and are able to, what we also need to do is reach out with that science, with the community knowledge to policymakers, to students as well. And so at ISIMOD, we work with a lot of networks. And one of those networks is a Himalayan University Consortium, where we bring together people from 80 different universities from the region and beyond really to focus on those mountain issues and develop a cadre of mountain leaders. We also have all different kinds of networks, like that Upper Indus Basin Network to do science, but also the scientists in those countries and practitioners can get messages to their policymakers. So now with that science, and by the way, I believe it's come a long way in the last 10 years, the science of the mountains, 10 and 15 years, what's happening to glaciers, what's happening to climate change. A lot of different solutions that are already there. So we do know enough to take action. Yes, we need better data and communication. We also need a lot more cooperation. And I was happy a few weeks ago on October 15th that ministers, let me go back, we did that HKH assessment report. Based on that, we worked country by country on a call to action. Then on October 15th, ministers of the 8 countries signed a declaration that recognized the call to action and really worked together on mountains together. So this was kind of that science reaching policymaker, an agreement across border in a rather difficult place to work together. So just a few more slides. This is a forest, and of course a river in Nepal, about 20 years ago. And now that looks much, much different with a lot of afforestation. I want to leave on a positive note because it is possible to make really good change. This is a lot of people working together, communities, government, all kinds of organizations has made community forestry a success in Nepal. So it is possible to get together and work together. And the final thing is all of us can do something to protect this important resource, the Hindu Kush Himalaya, and protect the poles. Thank you all so much for your attention.
David, great. Thank you for that. We in Australia think that our transboundary issues in the Murray-Darling Basin are challenging, but when I think about Isamod's work across eight nations, I'm in awe. Thank you for giving us the challenge, but also talking about some very practical approaches that are being successful, and that rousing call to action. Really appreciate it. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much.
You might have seen, for all of our attendees, you might have seen in the chat box our call to action to you. That is, please, we will have a Q&A session. So if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat box. And if you have a preferred speaker that you want to address it to, list that as well, please. What I'd like to do now, though, is to move on to our next speaker, someone who I met many years ago, and when she was actually awarded the International Water Association's International Woman of the Year award, and it's been my pleasure to work with Kusum Athakurala for many years since then. Kusum is the chair at Netwater, the Network of Women Water Professionals, amongst many other things. She's based in Sri Lanka, and her background actually was 12 years previous experience as a university teacher in languages and cultural studies, but then crossing to development studies, primarily water resources management. She has a Master of Science in Managing Rural Change from the Imperial College, University of London. She's a multidisciplinary skilled development professional. She's been recognised for her work in rural development, for integrated water resource management around gender and water. As I mentioned, the IWA International Women in Water Award, and also the Zonta Women of Achievement for Environment. Currently, Kusum's work in environment-related advocacy covers a range of ground-level issues in Sri Lanka, where I know she is incredibly active around water supply, sanitation, water pollution, mitigation through improved sanitation, and ameliorating the impacts of river sand mining. So Kusum, I know you have some great insights, and I'm looking forward to you sharing them with us, please.
Thank you, Tom. Ayubowan from Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, IWA Australia, AWA, for inviting me here. This activity could not be better timed. It is, as Dickon said, it is the best of times, it is the worst of times. It is the worst of times because all of us probably are under quarantine lockdown. And why it is the best of times, I will go on to tell you later. Next, please. Let me do this little reminder of the Dublin Rio principles, because I'm going to be referring to principle number 2 and number 3, the participatory approach and the role of women. And I think that it is useful for us to remind ourselves, because I personally have pegged a lot of my work on Dublin Rio 3, which has been tremendously useful. And especially even in this talking about climate change in the time of Corona, it is in particularly important that we look at Dublin Rio principles 2 and 3. Thank you. Next, please. Why is it the best of times? I'm, like Tom mentioned, I'm coming from literature. So I sort of play around with poetry. So I'm taking Andrew Marvell. Luckily, he's a dead poet and not going to complain. And I say, always at my back, I hear climate action changing gear. And I hear this climate action changing gear strongest at this point in moment. Why? Because the recent political events which have happened are going to change the way, I hope, that climate action becomes a reality in not only in one country, not in the States, but also in many parts of the world. So I do think that, I would be, I'm so happy I can sort of again do a little chortle and say, climate deniers of the world, take note. You have nothing to lose but the White House. And I would like to go on and say, I'm looking forward to a reinvigoration of climate diplomacy. But where does this really happen to make a change for people, for communities, for livelihoods, for ecosystems? It happens at the ground level. And the negative impacts of climate action on local communities, especially underprivileged women and youth, the negative impacts of climate inaction on water security, leading to national water security or insecurity. I think these are issues that we have to take up, even though a lot of our energy has now gone into dealing with the impacts of the pandemic. Next, please. I'm going to do this very quick run of the issues related to climate in Sri Lanka. When I was doing geography in A-level, we were told, look, we have a dry zone, a wet zone, and a intermediate zone, and we have 42 agroecological zones. Now this is becoming very different. Our dry zone is becoming drier, and our wet zone is getting enormous amounts of high intensity rains, which we cannot cope with. It is causing new kinds of disasters. Partly it is the high intensity rains of climate change, but this is exacerbated by human interactions, especially the poor soil management in sensitive catchment areas, which goes on to causing landslides. Next, please. Landslides come with predictable regularity. I'm showing you 2 of the worst landslides which affected us. Now, with every season of high intensity rains, the National Building Research Organization gives a landslide warning. We never had that 20 years ago. So climate change has added yet another dimension and yet another disaster to those affecting Sri Lanka. And we have now managed to end up in the top 5 of the Global Disaster Risk Index. Next, please. Next, please. Then what would be the climate action drivers? Yes, global agreements on which we have no impact need to be worked out at global level, but they also have to be operationalized at the local level. And here the Dublin Rio principles, the guidelines, action and decision making at the lowest possible level, recognizing the central role of women, the 51%, is very important. But even before the pandemic, we have found a bit of a struggle trying to get these two guidelines into operation. And we are now in the situation where we do not, we can hardly do any field work at all. So as much as we are trying to get out of a lockdown situation, as much as we are trying to move towards working on the field again, we also need to try and see how can we operationalize these two principles in the pandemic, post-pandemic, or hopefully post-pandemic situation. Next, please. I'm sharing this photo because, ever since I saw this, it has not left my mind. This is a woman from New Delhi walking with everything which is most precious to her back to her village, most probably 600 kilometers away. We had a climate exodus where the groups of poor, underprivileged, usually landless villagers trek to work in the informal sector of urban centers. Now we have this reverse migration of the pandemic exodus, where they go back to where they came from, but still with the same lack of investment in the periphery, still with the person power requirements. We have, most probably they will have only old men and women and children in the periphery. How do you make a livelihood again with such little resources? And this again is important because climate action has to impact on livelihoods. Next, please. If I may come back to Sri Lanka again, we have had state support for Sustainable Development Act in 2017. We have a legal framework with which to implement the SDGs. The SDGs have also taken a beating during the pandemic times. We talk very little of SDGs. We have a Sustainable Development Council, but for all of that, we are still high on the Global Risk Index. We still have silo thinking in agency and political divides. We still have a need for a mechanism or a platform which improves institutional and political coherence. We still have issues of caste and cultural changes in pockets. And community level advocacy and action driven by a few social auditors, driven by civil society organizations, community activists is still very limited. Thank you. Next, please. Who are the change makers in climate action? I would like to show these two pictures. One is this big group of people up in the right, upper right, is the setting up a young water professionals symposium, a forum for Jaffna in the northern part of the country. At the bottom is a group of girls from the tea estate, tea laborers' children, talking about climate change for the first time and doing their little group work on how they can make changes at ground level. Young adults and school children, young water professionals are very important for us in making a change in climate action. But we also have to recognize the key role played by community leaders, the bureaucracy, and more especially political decision makers, because let me go back to the Hague Forum, where one of the most important decisions that we took was accessing political decision makers. It is very important that the water and climate professionals link up to build awareness in political decision makers if we are to have a policy changes which are rooted in the ground. Next, please. Climate change, climate action, awareness is not always through lectures or lengthier tomes or multiple publications. They need to be like gender, location specific and culture specific. I'm showing again two photos of behavioral changes based on culture, a program that we did for the tea estate laborers in the Central Highlands. The Central Highlands is the watchtower of Sri Lanka. And it is working with them that we thought that we should move away from the non-traditional modes of learning and go into music, to art, to faith-based groups, working for the I'm sorry, I just had to slap a mosquito. I'm working with the groups which have the lowest level of literacy in Sri Lanka. So this is again an activity that we work out our Netwater mantra, where we build awareness, go on to advocacy before moving on to action. Next, please. This is again a school from the central province, the Water Tower of Sri Lanka. These children have been taught to learn, to study their water, their ecosystem. They map the water sources of the ecosystem, and they have now understood through 3 generational interviews, that is the grandmother, the mother, and the the grandchild, to underline the loss of water security within the last 50 years. Next, please. This is again developing the location-specific advocacy tools with community focus groups. We had done a beautiful poster for the estate sector on water quality. This is about water quality. You can see the various pollutant points. But when we put it to tea estate women, they said, this is all wrong. And we changed it, because in the end, they are the ones who know best. So this is very important that we tap into the knowledge of our community group, especially our indigenous technical knowledge, before we take on action, which to us seems very natural, very correct, but it may not really work at ground level. Next, please. I'm going to play a little clip from a Voice of Water series that we recorded for the Women, Water and Climate Change Tackling the Challenges conference, which just concluded about 3 days ago. This lady is a farmer's daughter from the eastern province, the rice basket of Sri Lanka. But she is also an irrigation engineer. And she mentions the loss of livelihoods due to climate-related high-intensity rains, which drives women out of, youth out of agriculture and puts farmers into poverty. Shall we play this, please?
Krishna Meera Sahib, irrigation engineer from Eastern Province. I could say I'm the daughter of a farmer's family. My grandfathers are farmers. Okay, in my childhood, I always spend my lesser time in the paddy fields. We have plenty of pure water, so we have used it. Still, we are using, but there are some issues. We couldn't do the 2 seasons. That's the only issue we are facing now. I have a great responsibility as a irrigation engineer. I should give the same opportunity for my villagers. I could help them to do that both season in a successful manner. In the past, in our village, the farming community and the farmers are the wealth and the richest. They are the leaders of our village. But now the trend is going in a different way, in a negative way, because most of the farmers they are now leaving from the agriculture because they are moving to business and some other things, and the young people also, they are not putting their interest onto that. There are some issues because due to the high intensity rainfall, everything is flooded. So when he is a wealth man, after a flood, it is zero, he is nothing. So yeah, he is losing everything. That's why the people are moving to another place. And the rehabilitation also, it is must to our area, because when we are rehabilitating, we can do the both season in a successful manner. And the paddy price is also an important one. It is not because the poor farmers, they are going to sell for a very low price, so they are not getting the profit, but the mill owners and the rice mill owners only, they are earning a lot. So that's why the poor farmer is still he is remaining as a poor, and the mill owners, they are going up and up. So that is the inequalities created in our village.
Thank you. Thank you. To a certain extent, one generation created the problems and this generation has to fix it. Can we go on to the next, please? This one is very particularly, it's very important to my heart because every year we come up with a theme from UN Water for World Water Day. Leave no one behind. The Sri Lanka Water Partnership decided that we would go to the people who would never have access to climate awareness, the hearing disabled in Jaffna. And this was the most touching program because it was in 3 languages, English, Tamil, and sign language. Can we just have a look, please, silently, but appreciate the effort? Yeah, thank you. I think that as we go on from theme to theme, we have to consistently look at whom we are leaving behind. Yeah. Thank you. For this next slide with the toad and the eagle, I'm indebted to my good friend Deepak Kewali, who raised this issue 4 days ago. The most of the climate writing belong to the eagle science. The toad reaches down to the ground level, but also picks up from indigenous ITK. So at some point, for us to be very effective, eagle science must meet toad science. And action has to generate collective enthusiasm and build a critical mass in being successful. And this is something that I'm concerned about. Within this pandemic situation, are we to a certain extent losing sight of the critical issues of climate change? Are we losing sight of our vision? Is our modus operandi changing because of the pandemic? And what can we do within the strictures and the structures imposed on us by climate, the corona pandemic? Next, please. We all say when things get back to normal, we all say we are living with the new normal. I would like to say we are living with the new abnormal. The march of the pandemic and the retreat of the SDGs is something that we are seeing but not recording in all our work. We have a global focus on hand washing, which is supposed to be the only way we can keep ourselves and our families and our communities safe. But how many have access to water? And is access to water an inaccessible solution? What if, now this year has been a very rainy year in Sri Lanka, but what if zero water days come next year with droughts? How do we deal with this? The pandemic, especially now, and this is an issue that I've been raising at many webinars, because we are able to get together because of Zoom, but the pandemic is sharpening the digital divide. It is already taking away from people who couldn't get contact. It is not possible for us to Zoom with community groups, but community groups and change at community level is what is needed. Especially I speak from the point of view of the Sri Lanka Water Partnership, which is having this big debate on what is it that we can do, because we see people very happily retreating into the Zoom reality. They are happy with doing institutional arrangements based on Zoom. But this is not what is needed. At the end of it, we have to make an impact at community level, get them involved in community decision making. That is the only way that we are going to have women and children coming. So the comfort zone of the laptop warrior, I hope, will not go beyond the pandemic. So at little points, we try to do, small activities. We try to write, we try to do, some things like this to keep the gender issue going. We look at the SDGs, which is not on anybody's radar right now. And we do recycle salmon tins with the SDGs to put on our desktops, but we need to have policy decisions that how do we go back to awareness at ground level once more. Next, please.
1 minute, please, Kusum.
Yeah. My final slide brings these two change makers, a group which is women and children. The children from the schools who do not have climate change awareness in curricula or have it in a very, very technical way. And the women from the health department who are who right now have a critical role to play, but pandemic, climate change became before the pandemic. It will probably stay after the pandemic. So as we collectively head again to the winter of our discontent all over the world, on our extended corona vacations, fully having our quarantinis, let us, the privileged few, on the right side of the digital divide, plan on getting our boots on the ground. Let us strive to support evidence-based policymaking based on ground level information. And let us strive to be super spreaders of a strong water voice and flatten the curve of water insecurity. So my friends, stay positive, but remember to test negative. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Kusum. I think we can all take that last observation very much to heart. Personally, I've always thought of Sri Lanka as being a water-rich land, but you've really demonstrated to us the complexity of water resource management issues there, including through some very fine personal stories. Thanks for your insights around gender equity, social inclusion, but also your observations around young water professionals. So thanks, Kusum. Let me move on now to introduce our final speaker. Before I do that, the chat box, great spot for you to log your questions. We will have a bit of time to ask some questions after our final speaker. And our final speaker is Dr. Noriyati Abdullah, who is the Associate Director at UTM International in Kuala Lumpur and Associate Director of Environmental Engineering at University Technology, Malaysia. Yati recently completed her tenure as a guest scholar at the Graduate School of Advanced Integrated Studies in Human Survivability at Kyoto University in Japan. She's the recipient of the 2019-20 ASEAN Science and Technology Fellowship, focusing on the strategic recommendations for water sector transformation under the auspices of the Academy of Sciences in Malaysia. Yati's been a board member of IWA. In fact, I met her when she was on the board then as a young water professional. She still seems much younger and, I dare say, much brighter than me. There are some things that you just can't change, but Yati has gone on from strength to strength. She's represented UTM and Malaysia at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for a Fulbright visiting scholar, and she was conferred one of the recognition as being one of the top 50 most impactful leaders in water and water management during World CSR Day in 2018. So, Yati, I'm sure you've got lots to tell us. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, for a very kind and very nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here, joining Australian Water Association on this webinar in collaboration with the IWA. It's a pleasure to see my colleagues as well. Kusum, it's been a long time since we last seen each other, I think at one of the IWA events. And Daryl, of course, has been one key person when we work together with the young water professional in Australia. Thank you, Tom, again for the nice introduction. And I would like to start with my title on Spotlight on Sustainability and Climate Change, Thirst for Action. So I truly like the previous two presentations by David and Kusum, both mentioning the roles of women and then the roles of young water professionals in mitigating climate change. And I would like to begin with what our former Prime Minister said during the assembly at the UN headquarters in New York in September 2019. He said, prepare for climate change and not war. So this is last year. And then he said that the international community, instead of preparing for war, should give attention to the climate changes and accompanying disasters. So both previous speakers have mentioned what are the type of disasters that is threatening the earth and the environment. And we should be preparing to combat climate change, bring back the normal environment we had been in over the last thousands of years. We should learn how to mitigate these natural disasters, constructing shelters, make rain and grow food without sunlight, and probably to the worst circumstance to evacuate the seaside. In Malaysia, 81% of Malaysians worry about climate change. And the occurrence of floods is no stranger to Malaysia. About 8 billion amount of ringgit has been dedicated to overcoming natural disasters. There are a total of 191 river basins in Malaysia, and roughly about 140 basins are flood prone. So many studies have been done and have been conducted, and all of these basins are located in Peninsula, despite Sabah and Sarawak, which is located on the Borneo area, are also being largely covered with basins. The previous Malaysia plans have dedicated so many efforts and structural measures have been carried out to mitigate floods. And these have been recorded in many researches by universities and researchers under the Academy of Science Malaysia. So although it rains all year round in Malaysia, we are not spared of the dry spell as well. So there's always the need for balancing between having that excess of water and also having lack of water. So, right. The impacts of climate change, obviously, as has been mentioned, all of this sectoral energy, waste disposal, agriculture, as well as industrial processes contribute largely to climate change, not just in our country, but also globally and regionally. Increasing surface temperature, increasing mean sea level, occurrence of extreme events, and variable rainfall. So the severity of dry spell and severity of flood is expected to increase in the years of 2025 to 2030 in Peninsular Malaysia, as well as the Borneo region. So in Malaysia, I'm also working as part of the team that looks at the development of water sector transformation plan for the 12th Malaysia plan. And this is looking into empowering of the integrated river basin management because climate change are heavily interlinked between all of the sectors. Global warming affects all. So as mentioned by the previous two speakers, all humans and ecosystem are hyperlinked, and we shall work together to mitigate climate change, and everyone has their own roles that they should play. And it all begins, I believe, largely at individual level. Because if you start as yourself, and think as to how might you contribute to global warming, and how might you actually reduce the impact, and how might you actually change the actions that you do on a daily basis that would then contribute to community impact and community cooperation. And then that moves forward to a collegial cooperation at national level. And then you begin to expand your cooperation at the regional level. And then all of the agreements that has been mentioned, Paris Agreement, and then the COP, as well as the SDGs, are all integrating everyone at global level to focus on the same thing and the same goal. So we all have to pay the cost and, of course, take the actions required to mitigate climate actions together. And then the impacts, obviously everybody knows what are the impacts of climate change. The world is already warmed by several degrees, and then it has impacts on heat waves, the oceans warming, ice cap melting, sea levels rising, and then it can be worse than famine or plague and global nuclear war. As I started my presentation with, we should be prepared for climate change rather than war. We should be spending money on mitigating climate change impacts rather than setting up new weapons to have war. And then depression among people, losing homes, and then there are no way of getting information to the remote areas. Some people living in the remote areas, in the mountains, in the villages. Similarly to Malaysia, we are lacking that information. I think if I ask my mom, does she knows anything about climate change, having that generation age gap, she would probably be continuing protecting the environment in her own conventional way. And then we have this generation, us, who probably knows the meaning that lies behind climate change. And then we know what to do, we understand the consequences, and we are basically the ones responsible to be the advocates for climate change, and then preparing the current environment and current resources for the future generation. There are so many predictions, I think, on the internet. If you just Google up climate change prediction for 100 years, 200 years, there'll be so many things that will be impacted at large scale globally. So if you just put it into layman words, are these the kind of environment and is this the kind of world that we would like to leave behind for our future children? So I've got 3 kids, and then I always think that whatever that I do in the water sector or giving talks or giving motivation in terms of whichever topic, I would always mention that the importance of what we do has greater impact for the future generations. And hence, what we do today should be, shared and then should be transferred to the young people, because they play such an important role as to having that understanding and empowerment for them to also contribute. And again, I would like to just share this map, and then it shows where Malaysia is among the other ASEAN countries. And we had the worst ever flood in 2014, 2015, whereby so many people lost their homes and then lost their families. And since then, the Act has been mushrooming for disaster preparedness and prevention. We never thought, that we would have such flood occurrence after over 30 years of time. And then when I think of my country, when I think of other countries as well, as I give lecture or do sharing with my students, for example, I would always think that what is it that Malaysia has not experienced in terms of disaster? I can't think of any, because we have had an earthquake in Kinabalu Mountain. We have had the worst flood, and then the transboundary haze, everything. So basically, no country on earth is spared from a climate change impact. And hence it becomes our huge responsibility as to how might we together overcome this, and then how might we be prepared to mitigate climate impacts. I'm very happy to say also that in the Malaysia 12 plan for water sector transformation, people is made as the key driver for transformation. I think it is the first time ever that we put people instead of policy and governance, instead of other things, instead of technology, as the key driver to reflect and also to drive transformation in the water sector. I just want to put Leonardo DiCaprio, not because of Titanic or anything like that. He is the 2016 Oscar acceptance speech. What I would like to say is that it is, despite the coronavirus and COVID-19, we are having our lockdown now, working from home until the end of 2020. So the year is basically gone. And also to reflect upon what Kusum said about keyboard warriors, and then how might we embrace change when everyone is now connecting online via Zoom, because he said climate change is real. It is happening right now, and it is the most urgent threat facing our entire species, and we need to work collectively together and stop procrastinating. So I think 2016 and 4 years later, 2020, we not only have to deal with climate change, but also with the global pandemic, which is thus far incurable. And then just to give you a little idea on the ecosystem of governance in Malaysia in terms of environment, water, and climate change. Political changes definitely will have huge impact on how environment, water, and everything is managed in a country. So at the moment, the environment, water, and climate change is being governed under the auspices of Ministry of Environment and Water. And then Green Tech Malaysia and Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Center, the two main organizational bodies that looks after climate change. And then obviously we work around so many stakeholders in Malaysia, worldwide. And then recently we had the International Green Tech and Eco Products Exhibition and Conference Malaysia, IGEM, which is being held virtually for the first time in recent October. And there are some nice videos on climate change initiatives. How do they do nature-based solution for climate change mitigation? What are the NGOs are doing? And then collaborations and collegial work that Malaysian academics are doing with our industrial stakeholders to overcome impacts. So the videos are available until end of December if you wish to have a look. And it's a simple online platform, and it's free for everyone to see. So I began with Mahathir. He talks about preparing for climate change and not war back in September 2019. And a year later, this is a recent September 23rd, 2020 this year, the government plans to assess the need for climate change legislation. So finally, we will be having that new policy and act as part of the current Environmental Act, which was back in 1974, and it's been so long since the government decides on drafting a new policy which includes climate change mitigation as well. So here he said, soon we are probably drafting a new climate change act depending on the understanding of policymakers and demand of the people, or using existing laws such as the Environmental Quality Act 1974 together with it. And then the ministry aims for low carbon society while enhancing green production and consumption and using fewer resources such as water, plastic, and electricity, among others, to ensure sustainability. And the key to understanding the future is one word, obviously, sustainability. And I keep stressing this to my students in my master classes. I said to them, you are here for a reason. You are taking my class, Master of Sustainable Systems, for a reason, because we need ambassadors for sustainability. We need ambassadors to tell everyone that sustainability is the one word for the future. And we have the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 following up the MDGs, and then following up all the other protocols that we have had so far before. And it's a matter of how might an individual play their role in terms of contributing to climate change mitigation. I'd like to mention a little bit about social sustainability because it includes aspects of people. So how might we fulfill our basic needs for livability, and then the equal opportunities to contribute between men and women, children and elderlies, and then human rights to basic supply of clean water, for example, and then labor rights, what are the social responsibility and community development, how might we play our role in community in driving all the necessary actions to overcome and mitigate climate impacts. It's about people's and then quality of life now and the future. Probably we are now enjoying clean cup of water for drinking as we go through the session, but we never know what will happen tomorrow. Today, probably I would have clean water on my tap, but I can't tell if tomorrow it'll be a different case or a different thing. Probably today I would be able to drive to Kuala Lumpur without any hassle, but my car would be stuck in flash flood at any moment in time, because I can say that I'm talking now from Putrajaya, where the Prime Minister's office is. I was telling David earlier on before we begin this session, and it has been raining almost every day, and the thunderstorm and everything. So it's really heavy, and I'm getting agitated of what that amount of water can do to our neighborhood, you see. And then it combines the design of physical environment with a focus on how the people who live and use space as a community. So we function as a community. We do not live alone in this world. And then climate change impacts affects everyone. And not just us, the flora, the fauna, everything is affected. So it is enhanced by development, which provides the right infrastructure to support a strong social and cultural life and opportunities for people to be involved and contribute. And we evolve from day-to-day basis as to how we react. And climate change is actually the reaction of the environment in accordance to our actions to it. So whatever actions that we project to the environment and the earth, that is how the environment and the earth is going to reflect back and react back to us. Just to share a couple of pictures, as I was doing my research for this topic for Malaysia, it has been, and there has been a rally thirsty for actions for climate change in 2019, back then when the former Prime Minister was advocating for preparing for climate change and not war. And then I can see that Malaysian people, similar, we have the same enthusiasm and also the same spirits towards having a better environment to live in, and not just for now, but also for the future generation. And then we are living in a multicultural, diverse people. We have so many ethnicities in Malaysia. And then despite the different religions and everything, different beliefs, people just come in together and campaign about break free from plastic. And people from different background collaborate with international students, for example, and then youth movement to drive actions for climate change mitigation. We do be involved in activities for Earth Day, Green Day, World Water Day, everything. We do it together, despite the different cultural background, and then despite the multiracial backgrounds that we have in the country. And one thing that I feel grateful about being, you know, in Malaysia and in this world is that when you can work together and forget where you come from and then make things happen despite your background.
1 minute, please, Yati.
And then, thanks, Tom. And then we have target 13.3, to build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. We are unable to do anything, so we are taking own initiative to help create awareness. And it's very important that the society and government realize that climate change is happening and there must be something be done about it. And the urgent action in terms of rapid climate change, when we look at 50% of emissions in 2050 and biodiversity loss by 2050, the future that we want is something that of quality, quantity, and continuity of resources, not just water, all kind of resources and supply, and to protect against natural disaster, to have livable, safe, and healthy environment, and an ecosystem vitality to support growth. It cannot be ignored. As mentioned by the first two speakers, working together with the professional to curb climate change, act at all level, personal level, national, and then a global level. It will not be reached if global warming stays or worsens, and create awareness creation is very important. And we must let the youth take the lead, because it's the world that they are going to live in, and then promoting teamwork at all levels. And I would like to end my talk with a remark, a quote by Robin Sharma, my favorite motivational guru, which is to be so good at what you do that no one else in the world can do what you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yati. I was going to talk about some of the really impressive slides, the great impact web, and the other stuff. But then I saw the Leonardo DiCaprio, and I thought, how cool is that? Good-looking guy, really wealthy, great actor, and he's smarter than most of our elected politicians as well. Okay, well done, Yati. Thank you very much. I think we have a little bit of time for some questions, but I think our speakers have given us some great material to work with here. One that has come through for David. How do you improve linkages between science and policy? What are the impediments, and what can we do to improve them?
Okay, good. Thanks for that question. For sure there are some politicians, we know some, who will not listen to science, but what I actually found in the HKH region is there was a lot of interest in climate change. The interest is there. Yes, maybe we need some more action. But I think one of the real impediments comes from the professionals, the knowledge workers, the researchers, the scientists themselves, and that is with communication and kind of amplifying the message. So I think one is we have to really work hard on our communication skills and get in the action to tell about our findings about climate and solutions, then figure out ways to amplify the voice. And so there, I think the networks are important. I think youth groups are incredibly important to raise the profile. And I think it's very important to reach out to media and really get the public involved. And I know a lot of, say, scientists are not that comfortable with that, but I think if you really want to make a difference, that's where it has to go, or at least meet people who can help and get on board with you to amplify the messages. So just a few thoughts on that question as well. I know we had a lot of success with networks who did have good political influence in their countries, and that works as well. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Great. Thanks for that, David. I have one here that's addressed to Kusum, but I might. I know this is also a highly interesting one for Yati as well. So I might get Yati to kick off and then throw across to Kusum. And the question is, first an observation that for Kusum around it was encouraging to see the role young water professionals play in Sri Lanka, and then the question was, do you think that young water professionals have the necessary support or platform for a strong enough voice in the debate? If so, what do you think is working well? And if not, what do you think could be done? So maybe a minute from Yati and then a minute from Kusum on that.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's a very good question, actually, for the young professionals, or not necessarily just in water sector, but we have all these talented young people working in many other sectors that contributes to the climate change impact. And I think as young people, you just got to know which platform that you want to work with, and then which platform that might help you to soar upwards. Most platforms, they have mentoring program, and I know IWA has one very strong one that supports mentoring of young professionals in the water sector. And then whether it's through education, technology, science, young people far and wide, I think they have so much opportunities in tapping their skills to speak up and to act for climate action.
Great, thanks, Yati. Kusum, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Tom. I think that, let us look at the Asian culture. We are brought up to respect elder people. We are, told, don't argue with them. And that is what is, in our minds. And sometimes when you become a young water professional, it is not very conducive to you getting up and, maybe contradicting or even giving a comment. I find this very much because I taught at university for a long time before I changed boundaries and became a water person. I feel that this is still very much ingrained in our young water professionals. So we have to go out and make opportunities. We have to develop mentoring systems. We have to give them this chance for expressing without being, knocked down and say, oh guys, you haven't lived long enough. Live long enough and you become senior, and then we'll listen to you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to wrap our questions up there because we are going to run out of time otherwise. But before I pass over to Darryl Day to close, I just wanted to say personally how much I appreciate your time, Kusum, Yati, and David. It's been great. But to do the formal wrap up and thank you. Let me pass across to Darryl Day, who I think most of you from Australia will know. Darryl was up until recently Managing Director of the International Centre for Excellence in Water Resource Management. He's now a visiting scientist with CSIRO Land and Water, but he's previously had a very, very long career with as a General Manager with Power and Water in the Northern Territory. He's been National President of AWA, chaired the IWA Australia Committee, been on the Strategic Council of IWA. He's a Distinguished Fellow of IWA. He's helped to organise the convention, the conference for Singapore International Water Week for many years. So Darryl is a true beacon of the water sector in Australia. What better person to wrap it up than you, Darryl?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. And I'd first of all like to just start by thanking each of the speakers. David, inspiring as always. I think your leadership of 9 years with ISIMOD is really been a beacon of bringing a strong voice to the science, to policy and diplomacy. And I know Australia through DFAT's Sustainable Development Investment Portfolio that's been working with ISIMOD, with CSIRO, with ASIA and with IceForm over that period of time has really benefited from your leadership and insight. So that came through so strongly today, the work that you've done in developing the science, but particularly taking it through to a call to action and I think leaving ISIMOD in a really strong position to then support the actions at a country level, at a regional level. So thank you very much for your insights, David. Kusum, I think 2013 you were keynote speaker at Ozwater in Perth. So lovely to have you engaged with the Australian water family as well as the international family through IWA and more broadly. I really liked your sharing of Deepak Kowali's eagle science and meets toad science. And I think in a lot of ways the theme of the three presentations really touched on the importance of a system level science and citizen science, and really how we need to listen to engage with the role of individuals, with the role of communities, focusing on diversity and social inclusion. So thank you very much for your messages. I think they're really compelling, and certainly on the chat box there's a number of requests to engage with you after this and continue that conversation. And Yati, thank you so much for your insights on Malaysia's journey. I think it has shown incredible leadership with the focus on climate change, with the changing of government agencies, bringing together all of the water functions and refocusing on climate change, but particularly again picking up that theme that each of the speakers has really focused on the role of the individual, the role of the community, the role of regional groups and national governments to have global impact. So quite inspiring presentations from our three speakers, and I thank you all individually and collectively. I'd also, in closing, just like to make a very special thank you to Michael Story. He's done an incredible job of pulling together this webinar, the practice sessions on and the conversations that have led up to today's webinar. So thank you very much for all the time you've put in, Michael. And thank you, Tom, for excellent chairmanship and moderation. And I'd also like to put a big thank you out to the Australian Water Association for hosting this, the committee of the National Committee of IWA, that's part of the Australian Water Association, and particularly Tomo Akati. Your fantastic work, Tomo, is very much appreciated in pulling all this together. And thank you to the participants. It's been lovely to have such an active group, and I'm sure the speakers would be very keen to engage with you and follow up some of those queries that you have. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to presenting another webinar at some time in the future. Goodbye.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, everyone.